Along the northern coast of Chile lies the Atacama, one of the oldest and driest deserts on the planet.
This desert is believed to be 150 million years old and covers a nearly 1,100 kilometer stretch of land between the Andes Mountains and the Pacific Ocean.
Arica is Chile's most northern city and is known as the city where it never rains. This hyper-arid desert landscape experiences less than 1 millimeter of rain each year and is largely devoid of plant and animal life. On the edge of the town, the Arica Water Company were digging ground to lay a new pipeline when they made a disturbing discovery, long lost to the sands of the Atacama.
Less than a meter below the surface, in an area less than 7 square meters, they uncovered the remains of a staggering 96 humans.
The deformed but well-preserved human remains were stuffed with sticks and reeds. They were decorated with both red and black clay masks and elaborate wigs.
This isn't your average burial. These are intentionally mummified remains. So who are they?
Using radiocarbon dating, archaeologists were able to prove that these extraordinary mummies were at least 7,000 years old.
This area of Chile was once home to the Chinchorro, an ancient culture of coastal hunter-gatherers and fishermen. They were a coastal-dwelling people who didn't cast any pottery or build any monuments. They lived from around 7,000 BCE to 1,500 BCE, more than 9,000 years ago.
That means that these 7,000-year-old South American Chinchorro mummies are more than 2,000 years older than the mummies of Egypt. This is an amazing discovery.
While some of the bodies have been inadvertently preserved by the dry conditions of the desert climate, resulting in naturally baked mummies, most of the remains have been intentionally and meticulously mummified.
Egyptian mummification practices involved laying the human remains flat and desiccating them before wrapping and entombing them. However, in the case of these Chinchorro mummies, the human remains were bundled together with other materials and more or less left to the elements in shallow grave sites. And the hyper-dry conditions of the Atacama made the preservation process even more effective.
The purposefully preserved remains of the Chinchorro fall into two main mortuary styles: mummies wearing the black clay masks that date from 5,000 to 3,000 BCE, and ones wearing red clay masks that date from 2,500 to 2,000 BCE.
The black clay mummies have been dismembered, treated, and reassembled, then stuffed with reeds, sticks, and ash. Then they were dressed with clay and painted with manganese, a pigment derived from local rock formations.
The red clay mummies were treated with a more surgical approach. Their organs were removed to dry the cavities before the stuffing process. They were then masked and painted with red ochre, a naturally red-toned clay.
Whether men, women, or children, these remains were preserved with care and treated with reverence, regardless of status. This is another difference from the well-known Egyptian mummification practice, which was primarily accessible to members of the elite.
Further inland, additional excavations revealed another 6 recent burial sites containing hundreds of remains. These naturally mummified remnants were dated to between 1000 BCE and 600 CE, long after the Chinchorro culture came to an end.
Physical investigation and X-ray imaging of these more recently discovered bones uncovered shocking details about how they may have lived and died.
They found broken ribs, cheeks and collarbones, severe head injuries, and obvious puncture wounds to the soft tissue, including the groin, lungs, and spine. These are clear signs of traumatic injury due to violence.
Among the remains, a young woman drew special attention because of the brutality of her injuries. In Chile's arid Atacama Desert, a gruesome discovery of the remains of a young woman revealed a brutal and violent past.
It's horrifying.
Archaeologists also found spears, knives, and stones tied with ropes alongside the bodies. The malicious injuries coupled with the weapons makes one wonder what was the cause of the violence.
The earlier Chinchorro people were not strangers to violence either, but none were treated in such an abusive manner as these later peoples. There were a number of fatal wounds found with the earlier Chinchorro mummies, like this adult male from around 1780 BCE. He was found with the head of a harpoon embedded in his chest, but the pattern of violence within this community appears to have been more sporadic than that found in later communities.
The adult Chinchorro population did show a smaller range of healed and fatal wounds. However, the level and inconsistency of these traumas appears to be representative of small skirmishes, nothing like the consistent levels of violence we see in these later communities.
To gain a better understanding of the violence these communities were experiencing, and to determine their origins and migration patterns, samples were taken from 69 of the naturally preserved mummies discovered at the 6 burial sites.
The result of the sample analysis proves that the mutilated woman was from further north, in today's Peru.
42 people in the sample are believed to have been coastal dwellers, living off the sea and foraging in the desert. This group of 42 would have had a lifestyle more similar to that of the earlier Chinchorro peoples.
The remaining 27 shared an isotopic signature that indicates that they lived on a more varied terrestrial diet. This means they were likely living deeper into the Izapa Valley and were less reliant on the sea.
This evidence suggests that the conflicts were between the farmers of the valley and the fishermen along the coast.
At the time, the river valleys were some of the only places in the Atacama with enough water to grow a greater range of foods.
It seems that after many thousands of years, groups of these coastal peoples began moving inland away from the sea in an attempt to forge a new life, building small villages along these scarce outcroppings of viable land.
They planted corn and chili peppers, likely trading with and learning from the non-desert farming communities of the north and east.
Though these communities remain small, many people settling in one area would naturally lead to increased interpersonal conflict. However, experts believe there were larger forces at play here.
Archaeologists turned to the environment, examining marine life, weather patterns, and conducting mineral tests for a more thorough understanding of the situation.
Fishermen are dependent on the sea, and these ancient communities were no different. Climate scientists studying historic patterns of El Niño believe that this recurrent natural event may have played a role in the violence that they experienced.
El Niño events interrupt the cool upswells of nutrient-rich water coming from the depths of the ocean and replaces them with warmer water. This results in less phytoplankton, ultimately reducing the available sea life that these ancient fishermen would have relied on.
Climate scientists also studied the discarded shells and marine life remains found in dump sites near these coastal communities. These remains are believed to be food waste, and so they're evidence of the local diet at the time.
In the same period of time that these people were experiencing extreme violence, they also found evidence of a significant seafood shortage. Less seafood for an extended period of time could have made these people even more desperate.
El Niño does not only influence the sea, it also has a drying effect on the already parched Atacama landscape. This warmer, drier climate would have also added pressure on these ancient farmers.
Archaeologists believed that the lack of seafood stocks had led desperate coastal communities into the nearby inland farming settlements in search of food.
Under the hottest, driest desert conditions exacerbated by El Nino, communities likely fought over access to the most basic resources, like food, land, and water.
As the environment changed, so too did the lifestyles of the Atacama peoples, who relied upon the sustainability of their resources and their ability to defend them. Abu Sir is situated on Egypt's western desert plateau, only 25 kilometers south of Cairo. Despite being so close to such a large urban city, it feels like it's in the middle of the desert.
The desert at Abu Sir is a famed burial ground of ancient Egypt. Over the course of centuries, many of the kingdom's pharaohs and nobility were buried here.
It is here, as well as in nearby areas like Giza, where excavations have revealed incredible artifacts and structures that have contributed significantly to our understanding of ancient Egyptian society.
A team of archaeologists were excavating a site when they discovered a vast collection of ceramic vessels. While it isn't unusual to find ancient ceramics at archaeological sites, the sheer volume of them was astounding.
Inside the vessels, they find materials that priests would have on hand when embalming or mummifying a body. So could this actually be a tomb?
At the famous Egyptian burial grounds of Abu Sir, archaeologists had discovered a large cache of ceramic vessels containing embalming materials, leading them to wonder if they'd uncovered a previously undiscovered tomb.
In ancient Egypt, the dead would sometimes be buried with some of the instruments and materials that were used in the embalming process. And it appears that this is what has happened here.
Archaeologists believe this was what's called a shaft tomb, essentially a deep rectangular grave. The ancient Egyptians sometimes buried their dead in tombs such as these, along with a diverse range of tools, clothes, and other necessities they might require in the afterlife.
But there are literally hundreds of these embalming vessels, which makes one wonder, who are they all for?
As they continue to excavate the chamber, they find a set of 4 limestone canopic jars. Canopic jars are essential vessels in the rite of mummification.
Mummification was an elaborate process which involved removing the organs from the body, treating them, and placing the liver, intestines, stomach, and lungs in canopic jars. They were then usually placed next to the deceased, where they would remain for all eternity.
The Egyptians believed that the body was the home for the soul or spirit. If the body was destroyed, or in other words, decomposed, the spirit would be lost. For this reason, great care was taken in preserving the physical manifestation of the body. This way, both spirit and body could continue on together into the afterlife.
But these 4 canopic jars are all empty. And not only are these jars empty, but there is no sarcophagus either. So if this is actually a tomb, where is the body?
In 1000 BCE, during the time that we call the Third Intermediate Period, embalming techniques improved, and for the wealthiest elites, these advances enabled priests to treat the viscera and then place them back inside the body. This means the canopic jars would be included in the grave for symbolic purposes only. So that kind of narrows down the time period we should be looking at, to sometime in the Third Intermediate Period or after.
After cleaning and inspecting the empty canopic jars, the archaeologists noticed inscriptions written across their surface, indicating the tomb belonged to a man named Wahhabri Merineith, son of Lady Aturu.
Throughout ancient Egyptian history, there were several men who went by that name. But a tomb like this would come at a significant financial cost. So this Wahhabri Merineith would likely have been a wealthy nobleman or high official of sorts.
Similar shaft tombs have been found in the direct vicinity of this one. In fact, next to Wahhabri Merineith lies the tomb of one Unearthed. Inscriptions on his statue indicate that he lived around the 6th century BCE.
This was a period of great volatility and flux for the kingdom. In 525 BCE, the Persian army under King Cambyses II had invaded and defeated the Egyptians. Cambyses crowned himself Pharaoh of Egypt and subjected its people to his rule.
Unearthed's life's work is inscribed on his statue, which reads that he convinced the occupying powers to respect local tradition and pay homage to Egyptian deities.
As they continued to excavate the tomb of Wahhabri Merineith, the archaeologists uncovered a secondary shaft that descended 16 meters into the bedrock. At the bottom, they discovered a large double sarcophagus composed of 2 sections, an outer limestone covering which encased an inner sarcophagus made of basalt. Both appeared to be heavily damaged.
There is clear evidence of looting. The grave robbers made an opening in the outer section of the sarcophagus and then smashed open the inner section in order to get inside and remove the mummy.
But despite the damage and the looting that had taken place, they hadn't succeeded in taking all of the precious items. The archaeologists discovered that Wahhabri Merineith had also been buried with 402 Ushabti figures.
Ushabtis are small human figurines that were an essential component of a person's burial. In the afterlife, when the gods called upon the deceased to work, he or she could turn to the Ushabtis, who acted as servants performing manual labor for the departed.
Inscriptions on his sarcophagus were also found, which partially translated to Commander of Foreign Mercenaries.
So, Wahhabri Merineith was a commander of mercenaries who were fighting for the newly minted Persian ruler of Egypt.
What we can tell from this grave is that Egyptians, despite intense pressures from the ruling Persians, maintained their rights and traditions, which might have been very difficult in the face of Persian occupation.
You can see evidence of this struggle in the statue of Unearthed. He's depicted wearing Persian clothing, but described in the text carved on the statue as an Egyptian official who lived in accordance with the traditional rules of Ma'at, or order.
Wahhabri Merineith may have been fighting for a foreign power by commanding their soldiers, but along with his Egyptian peers, maintained their local traditions at a time of incredible uncertainty.